During this season of Life Groups, we're looking at the book of James. James is one of the great books in my mind in the New Testament because it really gets practical. It's really pragmatic. In the last lesson, Chris talked about James chapter 1, and it says this: "Be doers of the word, not merely hearers who deceive themselves." In other words, our faith is to be lived out in the world. Chapter 2 continues that, but chapter 2 is where the book of James, it's where it gets into trouble with a lot of theologians, because in chapter 2, things take a little turn, and it begins to sound like it's not enough to have faith in Jesus, but that actually our works are required for salvation. And this has led a lot of theologians to just discount the entire book. One of those theologians who discounted the entire book was Martin Luther, the great church reformer. This is what Martin Luther said about the book of James because of chapter 2. He said, "Therefore, St. James' epistle is really an epistle of straw compared to these others, for it has nothing about the nature of the gospel in it." Luther didn't think the book of James revealed the nature of the gospel. For Martin Luther, what was important for him was the understanding that we are saved only by faith, by trusting in Jesus Christ, by turning to Jesus Christ, that we could do nothing to earn our salvation. And that's what we continue to believe today. But here are the verses that really began to give Martin Luther and other theologians some pause, some trouble. It's James chapter 2, starting in verse 14, where it says, "What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if you say you have faith but do not have works? Can faith save you? If a brother or sister is naked and lacks daily food, and one of you says to them, 'Go in peace, keep warm and eat your fill,' and yet you do not supply their bodily needs, what is the good of that? So faith by itself, if it has no works, is dead. But someone will say, 'You have faith and I have works. Show me your faith apart from your works, and I by my works will show you my faith.'" This is the conversation about faith and works. How do they play together? What's the role of faith in my life, and where do works come in? James, on the surface, looks like he's saying you got to have works in order to have any faith. But I don't think that's really what James is offering. I think maybe Martin Luther was overreacting just a little bit. What I think James is trying to get across is he's trying to say there's something that happens in us when we encounter the life-giving power of Jesus' grace and love and forgiveness. We begin to change. We can't contain what we've experienced. We begin to live that out in the world just as a natural consequence of believing in Jesus. We bear fruit in the world. My relatives in South Louisiana had huge orchards of oranges and satsumas, and they loved planting new orange trees every year. They plant huge plots of them, and they loved planting them, giving that gift of life. But here's what they hoped for: that every tree planted would bear fruit. It would continue giving life to the world. And what I believe God hopes for us is that after we've encountered the power of Jesus Christ, that we will continue sharing life with the world, that what we have received, we're going to put back out into the world. And that our faith, even if it just begins just with a small kernel of faith, we can begin to grow our faith and to reveal our faith when we begin to do works in the world. Let me give you an example from the book of James. At the end of chapter 2, James gives two names who are examples of this kind of life where they had faith that led to works. And one of them is a woman named Rahab. Now, you probably don't remember the name Rahab from Vacation Bible School because Rahab probably wasn't taught in your Vacation Bible School classes. Rahab lived in the city of Jericho at a very particular moment. At that moment, the people of Israel had left Egypt, they'd wandered through the desert for 40 years, and now they were about to come into the promised land. They were about to invade the promised land where Jericho was. So they sent two spies into the city of Jericho to see what they were up against. They stayed at the house of this woman, Rahab. They stayed there, and word spread through the city that these two foreigners were staying with Rahab. So the king of Jericho sent an army cohort to get these two spies. And here's a moment where Rahab had a choice to make. Would she turn these two spies over? Would she continue to hide them? She wasn't an Israelite. She didn't have anything to really gain by keeping them, by hiding them. But here's what we hear back in Joshua chapter 2 about Rahab. It says, "The Lord your God is indeed God in heaven, heaven above, and on earth below." Rahab has this kernel, this beginning of faith. And she chooses, with that little bit of faith, to hide the spies, to allow them to escape. And here's what happens as she does that. She sets up a situation where she saves her family, where she gives life to a lot of people, where she becomes the great-great-grandmother of King David, who was the ancestor of Jesus. When she acted out on this little bit of faith that she had, she changed not only her world, she changed the world for her family. And the ripple effect of her doing the work of faith impacted both you and me if we claim to follow Jesus Christ. And here's what James is inviting us to do. And I think this is what the story of Rahab invites us to do. If we even have just this beginning of faith, step out. Do something unexpected. Act on your faith. Because as we do that, then we grow our faith. Then we experience more of the power of Jesus, more of the grace of Jesus. When we're willing to take those steps, to do the work of faith, to live out what we've received. At the end of my freshman year in college, I was planning to go work at a summer camp. That was my plan. I'd signed the contract. I was ready to go. When the pastor from Clarksdale First Methodist called me, and he said, "Hey, why don't you come here this summer and be our youth director?" I said, "I don't know anything about that. I'm 19 years old. I still look like a junior high kid. I'm not sure that's really what I want to do." He said, just pray about it and think about it. It was a huge risk for me. I had enough faith to go and let other people tell me what to do at a summer camp, but did I have enough faith in God to really go do this kind of work? I finally decided to take that step. And God rewarded that work of faith by growing me in significant ways, by teaching me about my call, where I was to go with my life. What might happen for you if rather than just saying, "Well, I believe in God," what if you took a step out in faith? What if you volunteered with our youth ministry or our technology ministry at the church? What if you found a place to serve someone in your neighborhood? What if you had a conversation that you know you've needed to have? How might your faith grow? Because you decided to let your faith work.